You are nobody, Ethan. Sit down before you embarrass yourself. Victoria Langford said it into a microphone in front of 93 homeowners, and the room went so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. I was standing near the back of the Cedar Ridge clubhouse with a 4-page budget report folded in my hand and the bitter smell of burnt coffee drifting from a silver dispenser beside me. Victoria sat behind the board table in a cream blazer, blonde hair perfectly arranged, one hand resting on a black leather binder. The other held a silver pen. I had asked one question. That was all. 3 months earlier, our quarterly report showed more than $600,000 in reserve funds. Now Victoria wanted every homeowner to pay a $4,800 emergency assessment for drainage repairs, security upgrades, landscaping, and clubhouse maintenance. I inspect houses for a living. I know what drainage repairs look like. I know what a new roof looks like. More importantly, I know when numbers do not match what my eyes are seeing. I am not trying to embarrass anyone, I said. I am asking where the reserve money went. A few chairs creaked. Someone coughed. Victoria smiled, but her eyes did not. Mr. Cole, you inspect houses. You do not understand financial management. That earned a few nervous laughs. I looked toward the treasurer, a gray-haired man named Harold Bennett. He had been flipping through a stack of statements since the meeting began. Then Harold can answer, I said. Harold opened his mouth. Victoria turned toward him so quickly her silver pen clicked against the tabletop. There is nothing to answer. That was when I noticed the logo on the top sheet in Harold's stack. First County Bank. Harold quietly said something about needing updated account documentation. Victoria's fingers tightened around that pen until her knuckles lost color. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Most people probably never saw it. I did. My father spent 35 years framing houses, and he taught me something before I ever learned how to hold a level. A house always tells you where the damage started. You just have to stop staring at the paint. Victoria was giving everyone plenty of paint. She talked about rising costs, responsible leadership, protecting property values, and preserving the character of Cedar Ridge. Perfect phrases. Smooth delivery. Not one direct answer. Then she called for the assessment vote. I sat down without another word. As I folded the budget report, I circled 3 things with my pen. $600,000 for $1,800. First County Bank. Victoria watched me from across the room. Her smile returned when the assessment passed by 11 votes. She probably thought she had put me back in my place. 10 minutes later, as homeowners filed into the parking lot beneath the yellow glow of streetlights, she walked past me close enough for me to smell her expensive perfume. Some advice, Ethan, she murmured. Know when something is above your pay grade. I looked through the clubhouse window. Harold was still sitting alone at the table, staring at the bank statement Victoria had tried to close. Good advice, I said. What she did not know was that I had already stopped looking at the paint. By the time I got home, the clubhouse laughter had stopped bothering me. The numbers had not. I parked my 12-year-old Ford pickup in the driveway, carried my inspection bag through the garage, and set it beside a workbench covered with levels, moisture meters, flashlights, and enough scratched hand tools to make Victoria Langford uncomfortable from 50 feet away. Cedar Ridge liked things polished. My life had never been polished. I was 42 years old, divorced, and running a small home inspection business from a 3-bedroom house I had bought 6 years earlier. Most mornings started before sunrise with black coffee in a travel mug and ended with attic insulation stuck to my shirt. I had spent 17 years crawling beneath houses, climbing roofs, testing electrical panels, and explaining to buyers why fresh paint could sometimes be the most suspicious thing in a room. My father, Frank Cole, taught me that. He framed houses around Central Ohio for 35 years. His hands were permanently rough from lumber, cold weather, and honest work. When I was 14, he took me through a renovated farmhouse that looked perfect from the street. New siding, new windows, white kitchen. The seller wanted everyone staring at the shine. Dad walked downstairs, touched one basement wall, and pointed to a faint brown line behind a storage shelf. Water damage, hidden for years. Never let a clean surface answer a dirty question, he told me. I still heard his voice whenever something did not add up. That night, I opened Cedar Ridge's quarterly reports on my kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Rain tapped lightly against the window over the sink. 3 months earlier, the reserve balance had been listed at $612,000. The new report showed no current reserve total at all. Instead, there were vague categories: infrastructure stabilization, security modernization, landscape restoration. No vendor names. No itemized costs. No completion dates. I pulled up photographs from my inspection jobs around the neighborhood. 2 weeks earlier, I had inspected a house near the clubhouse for a homeowner planning to refinance. The drainage channel behind his property was unchanged. The security cameras at the west entrance were the same faded units that had been hanging there for years. And the clubhouse roof Victoria claimed required major emergency work? I could see it from my own street. Nothing about it looked new. At 9:18, my email chimed. The sender was Cedar Ridge Compliance Committee. I opened it and almost laughed. Unauthorized commercial vehicle visible from roadway. My Ford pickup. The same truck I had parked in the same driveway for 6 years. $50 fine if not corrected within 72 hours. I checked the timestamp. The notice had been created 23 minutes after the meeting ended. That was fast, even for Cedar Ridge. I printed it and placed it beside the budget report. The warm paper smelled faintly of toner. Then another email arrived. Garage storage visible during door operation. Warning only. For now, I leaned back in my chair. Victoria had called me nobody in front of 93 people, and apparently nobody had become important enough to monitor before she even got home. I opened a fresh folder on my computer and named it Cedar Ridge Records. Into it went the budget reports, the assessment notice, both compliance emails, and a photograph of my truck sitting legally in my driveway. Then I wrote down the 3 things I had circled earlier. $600,000 for $1,800, First County Bank. Dad had taught me not to start by guessing what was hidden. Start with what you could prove. So that was exactly what I did. The next morning, Cedar Ridge looked exactly the way Victoria liked to advertise it. Sprinklers hissed across trimmed lawns. Fresh mulch darkened the flower beds around the stone entrance sign. A landscaping crew moved quietly along Maple Crest Drive, while homeowners backed spotless sport utility vehicles out of matching 2-car garages. Everything looked maintained. Everything looked expensive. That was the problem. I spent the first half of Tuesday doing my actual job, inspecting a 4-bedroom colonial 2 streets from the clubhouse. Around noon, I climbed down from the attic, wiped insulation dust from my sleeves, and noticed Victoria's white Mercedes parked at the curb. She was standing beside the homeowner, Linda Parker, holding a clipboard against her cream blouse. Linda looked uncomfortable. "Ethan," Victoria said, "commercial activity requires prior approval." I glanced at my inspection bag. I was hired by the homeowner. Linda nodded immediately. Victoria ignored her. Cedar Ridge has standards. There was that word again. Standards. Victoria said it the way some people say law. I packed my moisture meter into its case and asked Linda to email me if there were any problems with the inspection report. Victoria waited until Linda went inside. "You seem determined to make yourself difficult. I am inspecting a house. You know what I mean." I did. I also knew better than to give her the argument she wanted. I walked toward my truck. Her perfume followed me through the warm afternoon air. "The board can make life here very expensive," she said behind me. I turned around. "Then I hope the board keeps good records." Her expression froze for half a second. That was all I needed. By Wednesday, another notice appeared in my mailbox. This one claimed my garage door had remained open for excessive periods during business activity. Thursday brought a warning about a ladder visible beside my shed. Friday morning, I received a $75 fine because my work truck allegedly displayed prohibited commercial identification. The lettering on the door had been there since I moved into Cedar Ridge. 6 years without a complaint. For notices in 5 days after one question about the reserve fund. I printed every one. Dates, times, rule numbers, envelopes. Nothing went in the trash. Then something more interesting happened. Friday afternoon, my neighbor Margaret Hayes stopped me while I was checking the mailbox. Margaret was 67, retired from corporate accounting, and possessed the kind of memory that made calculators nervous. She held the assessment letter folded beneath one arm. "You were right to ask," she said. "About what?" "The money." A lawnmower hummed somewhere behind us. Margaret lowered her voice. She had served on the finance committee 2 years earlier, before Victoria quietly dissolved it. According to Margaret, Cedar Ridge had maintained reserves above $500,000 for years. Major expenses required board approval, vendor documentation, and 2 authorized signatures. So why dissolve the committee? I asked. Margaret looked toward the clubhouse. Victoria said it slowed things down. That phrase stayed with me. Before we separated, Margaret mentioned something else. Last fall, the board announced a $68,000 security upgrade. New cameras, new recording equipment, new entrance controls. I drove to the west gate that evening and parked across the street. The sunset reflected orange across the security camera housing above the entrance. I knew that housing. I had photographed it during an inspection 18 months earlier. Same faded paint, same crack near the mounting bracket, same old model number visible beneath the lens. I pulled up the photograph on my phone and compared them side by side. Nothing had been replaced. I sat behind the steering wheel, listening to the air conditioner hum, and opened Cedar Ridge records. Into the folder went both photographs and the date of the announced upgrade. Victoria wanted me focused on ladders, garage doors, and truck lettering. Instead, she had just given me the first physical thing I could prove. Saturday morning, I went back to the west entrance just after sunrise. The air smelled like wet grass and warm pavement, and the only sound came from sprinklers clicking behind the brick monument sign. I parked on the public street, stayed outside the gate, and photographed the camera from several angles. The model number was still visible beneath the housing. Same unit, same bracket, same crack. Back home, I opened the association records residents could access through the Cedar Ridge portal. The $68,000 security project was listed as completed 8 months earlier. The description included replacement cameras, upgraded recording equipment, and new entrance controls. I checked the east gate next. Same old keypad, same weathered camera housings. Then I drove past the clubhouse. Nothing there looked recently replaced either. One questionable project could be sloppy bookkeeping. Three made me curious. By noon, Margaret Hayes was sitting at my kitchen table with reading glasses balanced low on her nose while my printer pushed financial reports onto the counter. Fresh toner mixed with the smell of coffee. She worked through the numbers without speaking for almost 10 minutes. "This is not how these reports used to look," she finally said. "What changed?" I asked. She tapped one page. Older reports listed vendors, invoice totals, approval dates, and reserve balances. The newer reports grouped expenses beneath broad labels like community enhancement and infrastructure services. Specific names had disappeared. "That makes comparison harder," she said. "Does not prove anything, but it makes questions harder to answer." That distinction mattered. I was not interested in accusing Victoria of something I could not prove. So I started with physical work. The association had reported $39,000 for clubhouse roof rehabilitation. I called the roofing company listed in meeting minutes from the previous year. I did not ask for private account information. I asked whether they had performed the publicly announced project. The receptionist checked the address and told me their company had submitted an estimate but had never been awarded the job. I wrote down the time and her name. Next came landscaping restoration. Cedar Ridge had reported $27,000 for irrigation improvements near the South Common area. I walked the public sidewalk with Margaret that afternoon. The control boxes were old enough that their labels had faded white. One still carried an inspection sticker from 3 years earlier. Again, not proof of missing money, but another mismatch. At 4:30, Victoria's Mercedes slowed beside us. Her window lowered. "Taking another inspection tour, Ethan?" Her voice had that polished sweetness people use when they want witnesses to think they are being friendly. "Just walking." She looked at Margaret. "Residents should be careful about spreading misinformation." Margaret smiled. "Good thing numbers are not rumors." Victoria's expression hardened. She drove away without answering. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Another compliance notice. This one accused me of photographing association property for unauthorized commercial purposes. I stared at it and almost admired the timing. Then Margaret noticed something on the financial report still folded in her hand. "Ethan." She pointed to a line near the bottom. "Reserve transfer. $185,000. No vendor. No project description. Just a date from 6 months earlier and 4 words. Transfer for operational needs." "Where did it go?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "This report does not say." Beneath the transaction was a small notation I had missed twice. "Account institution, First County Bank." I felt the same quiet click in my head that I hear when a home inspection finally explains a stain, a crack, or a crooked floor. We still had no accusation, no secret, just an old camera, work that did not match public reports, and $185,000 moved somewhere without an explanation. But 4. The first time, all 3 were pointing in the same direction. The certified envelope arrived Monday at 11:16 in the morning, wedged between a hardware catalog and my electric bill. First County Bank was printed in dark blue across the upper left corner. I stood at the mailbox for a second longer than necessary, listening to a delivery truck rumble away down Maple Crest Drive. The August sun had already heated the black metal until it felt warm against my fingers. The letter was not addressed to me personally. It was a notice distributed to Cedar Ridge homeowners regarding an administrative delay affecting electronic processing of the new special assessment. Payments scheduled through the association portal might be temporarily unavailable while updated account authorization was being verified. That was all it said. No accusation. No explanation. But after seeing the unexplained $185,000 transfer, the timing felt impossible to ignore. I called Margaret. She arrived 20 minutes later carrying a yellow legal pad and reading glasses. Banks do not send notices like this because somebody forgot a password, she said after reading it twice. What does it mean? It means we do not guess. I smiled. That was exactly why I trusted her. We added the letter to Cedar Ridge records and built a timeline across my dining table. 6 months earlier, $185,000 moved from reserves for operational needs. After that came vague project expenses, disappearing vendor details, and the $4,800 assessment. Now the bank was verifying account authority. At 2:15, my phone rang. Victoria. I let it ring once more before answering. Ethan, I think this situation has become unnecessarily adversarial. Her voice was softer than usual. No microphone. No audience. Which situation? I asked. A pause. The compliance matters. She offered to remove every fine against my truck, garage, ladder, and photographs. All I needed to do was acknowledge that my financial questions had been answered at the community meeting and stop requesting additional association records while the assessment was processed. I looked at Margaret. She could hear Victoria through the speaker. Margaret slowly wrote one word on her legal pad. Why? That is an unusual offer, I said. It is a practical solution. Send it to me in writing. Silence. The refrigerator compressor clicked on behind me. There is no need to formalize a neighborly conversation. Then there is no agreement. Her tone changed instantly. The polished warmth disappeared. You are creating confusion in this community. I asked where the money went. And you were given an answer. I was given categories. She hung up. Margaret stared at the phone. She just offered to erase 4 violations if you stopped asking for records. Without putting it in writing. Exactly. At 4:30, Harold Bennett emailed me. The subject line contained only 2 words, Financial Committee. Harold said he could not discuss private banking details, but as HOA treasurer, he had requested a formal board review of account authorizations and reserve transfers. He also confirmed that homeowners had the right under Cedar Ridge's governing documents to inspect certain association financial records through the proper process. Attached was a records request form. I completed it that evening. Meeting minutes, approved budgets, vendor contracts, reserve transfer authorizations, payment summaries, no personal accounts, no private customer information, just records belonging to the association whose bills I helped pay. Before I went to bed, another email arrived from Victoria. This one was in writing. My compliance fines had been suspended pending board review. I read the sentence twice. She had spent a week trying to make my life more expensive. Then First County Bank sent one administrative notice, and suddenly she wanted peace. I placed the envelope beside my father's old carpenter pencil on the table. Margaret had been right. We did not know what the bank issue meant yet. But Victoria's reaction had told me something almost as useful. Whatever was behind that account, she desperately wanted me to stop looking before the paperwork caught up with her. The records arrived Thursday morning through Cedar Ridge's homeowner portal. 27 files. Budgets, meeting minutes, vendor summaries, reserve reports, and payment approvals stretching back 18 months. I downloaded everything before breakfast. By 8 o'clock, Margaret was at my dining table with coffee, a calculator, and 3 sharpened pencils lined beside her legal pad. Rain tapped against the kitchen window while we worked. The first hour gave us nothing dramatic. Lawn maintenance matched the budget. Insurance matched. Pool service matched. Then Margaret stopped at a payment summary from 6 months earlier. There, The $185,000 reserve transfer had moved into an operating account at First County Bank. That part was legitimate on its face. The problem came afterward. Within 3 weeks, the operating ledger showed payments to 3 vendors I had never seen in older Cedar Ridge records. Summit Community Consulting, Langford Property Solutions, Premier Residential Services. Together, they received more than $140,000. I searched the meeting minutes. No discussion, no recorded approval, no explanation beyond project management and infrastructure coordination. Margaret leaned closer. Find the contracts. There were only 2. Summit had a 4-page agreement signed by Victoria and Harold. Premier had a routine maintenance contract. Langford Property Solutions had nothing. No contract, no proposal, just payment entries totaling $62,000. The name sat on my screen like a warning light. Could be unrelated, I said. Margaret nodded. Then we verify before we assume. That afternoon, I searched public state business records. Langford Property Solutions was a real company, registered 4 years earlier. The mailing address was a commercial office building 12 miles away. The organizer listed on the public filing was not Victoria. It was a man named Gregory Langford. I did not know who he was, and I refused to invent an answer. I saved the public record and moved on. At 3:20, Harold called. His voice sounded exhausted. He confirmed the board had authorized moving reserve money into operating funds for approved projects, but he did not remember approving every payment that followed. My signature appears on some electronic authorizations, he said carefully. Did you authorize them? I asked. Silence. I am reviewing that. That answer bothered me more than a denial would have. Then he told me First County Bank had temporarily restricted certain outgoing transactions until the association confirmed its authorized account users. The bank was not revealing anybody's private information. It was requiring Cedar Ridge to prove who had authority over Cedar Ridge's own money. That distinction mattered. At 5:47, Victoria emailed every homeowner. She blamed technical banking delays and misinformation being circulated by individuals without financial expertise. She did not use my name. She did not need to. 10 minutes later, Margaret forwarded me something from an old Finance Committee archive. It was a vendor disclosure policy requiring any board member with a family or business connection to an association contractor to disclose that relationship before payment approval. I read it twice. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Linda Parker. She had seen the community email and wanted me to know something. Gregory Langford had sold her a house 7 years earlier. She remembered him clearly because he had attended the closing with his wife. Victoria. I stared at the message while rainwater traced crooked lines down the kitchen glass. Margaret saw my expression. What? I turned the phone toward her. She read it without speaking. We still needed documentation. A homeowner's memory was not enough. But suddenly the missing contract, the unexplained payments, the bank restriction, and Victoria's desperation were no longer separate cracks. They were beginning to form a pattern. My father used to say the dangerous part of hidden damage was never the stain you could see. It was finding out how far the water had traveled behind the wall. Looking at $62,000 in payments to Langford Property Solutions, I realized we had finally found the wall. By Friday afternoon, the question was no longer whether Langford Property Solutions existed. The question was why Cedar Ridge had paid its $62,000 without a contract anyone could find. Margaret and I did not contact Victoria. We sent the records to Harold and requested that the board follow its own conflict disclosure policy. At 6:12 that evening, Harold replied with 3 words, "Emergency meeting Monday." The clubhouse was packed when I arrived. Folding chairs filled every open space, and the air smelled like coffee, perfume, and damp jackets from an evening thunderstorm. Victoria sat at the center of the board table wearing a navy blazer. The same silver pen from the assessment meeting rested beside her hand. Harold sat 2 chairs away with a folder thick enough to bend at the corners. Margaret took a seat beside me. Victoria opened by blaming rumors, incomplete information, and what she called irresponsible speculation. Then Harold cleared his throat. Before we continue, First County Bank has completed its review of the association account authorization records. Victoria reached for her pen. Her fingers tightened around it exactly the way they had when the bank was first mentioned. Harold explained that the bank had not released private customer information. It had provided Cedar Ridge through its authorized treasurer and independent accountant, records concerning Cedar Ridge's own accounts. Those records showed that the reserve transfer had been properly moved into operating funds. What happened afterward was the problem. Several payments had been initiated through Victoria's authorized account access and sent to Langford Property Solutions. The room went silent. Victoria leaned toward the microphone. That company provided legitimate consulting services. Harold opened another folder. Then we need the contract. The agreement was handled administratively. We cannot locate it. Victoria's jaw tightened. Harold continued. The independent accountant had compared bank transaction records with board minutes, vendor disclosures, and payment authorizations. There was no recorded board vote approving Langford Property Solutions. No disclosure identifying a relationship between Victoria and the company. Then Harold placed a certified public business filing on the table. Gregory. Langford was listed as the company manager. A second document established the connection Victoria had never disclosed to the board. Gregory was her husband. A low murmur moved across the room. I did not feel triumphant. I felt cold. $62,000 had left an association account and gone to a company managed by the president's husband without the disclosure Cedar Ridge rules required. Victoria immediately said Gregory's company had performed legitimate project coordination and that their marriage did not make the payments improper. Margaret whispered, "That is possible." She was right. A family connection alone did not prove theft. But the accountant was not finished. He displayed the invoices associated with those payments. Security modernization, roof project coordination, irrigation management, the same projects I had physically checked. The old cameras, the roof contractor who had only submitted an estimate, the irrigation equipment that showed no sign of the reported upgrade. Victoria's silver pen stopped moving. Then came the number that changed the room. The accountant calculated that the unsupported payments and unresolved project charges created a reserve shortfall almost equal to what Cedar Ridge expected to collect from the $4,800 assessment. Suddenly, that assessment did not look random. It looked like a patch over a hole homeowners had never been told existed. Victoria looked directly at me. "You have no idea what you are implying." I shook my head. "I am not implying anything." Harold closed the bank file. "Neither is he. These are the association's records." For the first time since I had known her, Victoria had no polished answer ready. The bank had not exposed some private account or whispered a secret to me. It had done something far more damaging. It had authenticated the paper trail she thought nobody would ever put together. For several seconds after Harold closed the bank file, nobody moved. The clubhouse air conditioner hummed above 90 homeowners who suddenly seemed afraid to make a sound. Victoria finally set her silver pen down. The tiny click against the table carried farther than it should have. "Those invoices represent legitimate services," she said. The independent accountant, Martin Keller, adjusted his glasses. "Then the supporting records should establish that." He opened another folder. They did not. The $62,000 paid to Langford Property Solutions appeared across 6 transactions. 3 referenced security modernization. 2 referenced infrastructure coordination. 1 referenced clubhouse project management. Martin matched each payment date against Cedar Ridge meeting minutes. No board approvals. He matched them against vendor disclosures. No family relationship disclosed. Then he compared them with the physical projects. The security cameras had not been replaced. The roofing company had submitted an estimate, but performed no rehabilitation work. The irrigation equipment remained unchanged. Victoria leaned toward the microphone. "I relied on contractors and delegated project oversight." Margaret spoke from beside me. "To your husband's company?" A murmur rolled through the room. Victoria looked at her, but did not answer. Harold raised his hand. "There is more." He produced electronic authorization records supplied to Cedar Ridge through the bank's review of its own association account. Every disputed payment had been initiated using Victoria's authorized credentials. Some required a second approval. Harold stared at the table. "Several show my authorization, but I do not recognize the approval times." Martin immediately clarified that the issue required further technical review and that nobody should assume how those approvals occurred until the records were examined properly. That mattered. Evidence first. Conclusions second. Victoria tried to call the meeting adjourned. 3 board members objected. One of them, Susan Miller, requested an immediate vote to suspend Victoria's financial access pending an independent audit. The motion passed 4-1. Harold called First County Bank from the table using the authorized board procedure, and within minutes the association began the process of updating account controls. Victoria remained seated. Her face had lost the practiced expression I had seen at every meeting. Then Linda. Parker stood near the back. What about the $4,800? Martin turned to the projected spreadsheet. Cedar Ridge expected the assessment to collect just under $460,000. The current unresolved reserve shortage, including unsupported payments and projects requiring verification, sat frighteningly close to that amount. Not identical. Close enough to explain why homeowners deserved answers before paying another dollar. The board voted to pause collection of the assessment until the audit was complete. That was when Victoria looked at me. You did this because you were angry about compliance notices. I reached into my folder and placed the notices on the table one at a time. Truck, garage, ladder, photographs. Each had been issued after I questioned the reserve fund. Then I placed my photograph of the old Westgate camera beside the $68,000 security expense. No, I said. I started asking because the work did not match the paperwork. Her eyes dropped to the photograph. That old cracked camera housing had been there 18 months before Victoria claimed it was replaced, and now nearly everyone in the room understood why that mattered. The board suspended every compliance fine she had issued against me pending review. Nobody applauded. Somehow, the silence felt stronger. Victoria gathered her binder, but she left the silver pen on the table. I noticed it because I remembered her gripping it the first night Harold mentioned First County Bank. The thing that had looked like authority then now sat abandoned beside a stack of authenticated records. My father had been right. We had spent weeks staring past the fresh paint. Now the wall was open, and everyone could finally see how far the damage might have traveled. The audit took 34 days. During that time, Cedar Ridge became quieter than I had ever known it. Victoria stopped sending community emails. The compliance notices disappeared. Her white Mercedes no longer sat outside the clubhouse every morning. First County Bank maintained the updated account controls while Martin Keller reviewed 18 months of association transactions, contracts, invoices, approvals, and vendor records. When the final report arrived, Harold called another community meeting. This time Victoria did not sit at the center of the table. She sat near the end with her black leather binder closed in front of her. The silver pen was gone. Martin explained the findings without drama. Some projects had been legitimate. Others had been poorly documented. But $62,000 paid to Langford Property Solutions lacked the required conflict disclosure and sufficient supporting documentation for the services described. Additional expenses required correction or reimbursement, and the board referred the unresolved matters to its attorney and appropriate authorities for further review. Nobody declared guilt from a folding chair in a clubhouse. The records would go where records were supposed to go. What mattered to the homeowners was simpler. The $4,800 assessment was canceled. After the accounts were reconciled, Cedar Ridge adopted an independent financial review schedule, dual authorization for major payments, quarterly vendor disclosures, and homeowner access to clearer financial reports. Victoria resigned as president before the board could hold its scheduled confidence vote. Harold resigned as treasurer 2 weeks later, saying he should have questioned the electronic approvals sooner. Margaret agreed to serve temporarily on a restored finance committee, although she made everyone promise she would never have to organize another community picnic. My 4 compliance violations were permanently removed. So were several questionable notices issued to other homeowners during Victoria's final year. 3 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of a house across town, inspecting a stain beneath a second-floor bathroom, when Margaret called. Cedar Ridge had completed its first quarterly review under the new rules. Every reserve transfer was listed. Every major vendor was named. Every approval had 2 signatures. Boring, she said. Beautifully boring. I laughed and went back to work. That evening, I parked my old Ford in the same driveway Victoria once tried to fine me for using. The sun was dropping. Behind the maples, and sprinklers clicked across the lawns exactly as they had the morning this started. On my kitchen table sat the original special assessment notice, the First County Bank envelope, photographs of the cracked security camera, and my father's carpenter pencil. I had kept them together for one reason. Not as trophies. As reminders. Victoria had looked at my work shirt, my old truck, and my inspection bag and decided she knew my value. She thought authority lived in a blazer, behind a microphone, at the center of a board table. My father had taught me something different. Real problems rarely announce themselves. They hide beneath fresh paint, behind clean walls, inside numbers nobody bothers to compare. You do not expose them by shouting. You measure. You document. You follow the evidence until the surface can no longer hide what is underneath. I put the bank envelope into my records folder and closed it for the last time. Victoria had been right about one thing. I had no title, no office, no seat on the board. I was still nobody important. Just a home inspector who noticed an old camera, asked where the money went, and kept looking when someone powerful told me to sit down. Thank you for watching this story. If Ethan Cole's patience, attention to detail, and determination to follow the evidence instead of being intimidated inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who enjoy compelling HOA dramas and stories where ordinary people uncover the truth by asking the right questions. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable HOA conflicts, hidden financial records, property disputes, and real-life justice stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story about suspicious paperwork, overlooked details, and ordinary homeowners who refuse to stop asking questions when the numbers simply do not add up. Your support helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to life, and we cannot wait to share the next one with you. That if you were in Ethan Cole's position, would you have paid the $4,800 assessment and moved on, or would you have kept investigating until you discovered exactly where the HOA's money had gone? Tell us your choice in the comments and explain why.